I think most of you probably know the story of the Buddha, but I'll remind you of a little bit of it. So, he was a prince in northern India, and he left the comfort of the palace, went off in search for a way to transcend the cycle of stress and suffering, and practiced diligently for half a dozen years. And then the story goes that on this toward the end of this time, he sat down beneath a tree, determined that he wasn't going to get up again until he reached enlightenment. And so as he was sitting under this tree, Mara, who's kind of the personification of death or evil in Indian cosmology, came up, and Mara didn't want him to do this. Mara likes the cycle of birth and death. And so he tried to frighten the Buddha away from this quest. And he did this in various means, and toward the end, he asked the Buddha, so what makes you think you deserve this? And the Buddha touched the earth, and he realized at that point that he had lived a number of lives where he had been moving toward this point. He had been reborn countless times, and each time he was moving closer to awakening. And so he said, the earth is my witness. And at that point, he became enlightened. So you might wonder, well, what happened during all of those lives? And the Indians, in his time, wondered about that. And there was a lot of mythology, the stories that already existed, kind of interesting parables and things like that, about, that reflected on kind of moral growth and spiritual growth and that kind of thing. So, we don't know for sure, but what seems to have happened is that Buddhism appropriated these existing stories and said, oh yeah, that was the Buddha. So I want to talk a little bit about these stories, but in the context of what it was that the Buddha was doing during these past lives that led him toward awakening. And there's basically a number of virtues that had to be perfected. A lot of people resist using the term perfected. The Pali word is paramitas or paramitas in Sanskrit, and we generally translate them perfections, but that kind of carries with it the idea that you have to be perfect, or you have to do these things perfectly. And really these are processes you try to get closer to. So you see these as places to move toward in your practice and in the way you live your life. And actually, by doing this, that is living an enlightened life. So there's 6 of them that are pretty commonly accepted among Mahayana Buddhists, and there's a lot of overlap between the Mahayana version and Theravada version. There's 10 of them in Theravada Buddhism. And then Mahayana Buddhists, some traditions add a few extras on and stuff like that, so it gets very confusing. So I'm going to stick with the 6 that almost everyone accepts. So the first is dana, generosity, charitable living. So if you wanted to put that in the form of a vow and a call to action, you would say, may I be generous and helpful. That would be dana. And then sila, this refers to kind of moral restraint. So if you want to put that in a vow, it would be something like, may I refrain from causing harm. Ksanti, may I be patient and able to endure difficult circumstances and the wrongdoings of others. Virya, may I be determined, energetic, and diligent. Jhana, may I be meditative and live mindfully to serve all beings. And pranya, may I live wisely and impart the benefit of wisdom to others. So the path to enlightenment included taking these things kind of as far as you could toward their perfection. And so these kind of became reflected in these stories, the Jataka tales. That's the way they say it in the Tactical Jataka. It's an ancient Indian word, though, so you can say it any way you want to. Nobody's going to call you on it.
Right.
There are hundreds and hundreds of these stories. And again, they probably came from existing mythology that were out there, and Buddhists found them convenient to appropriate, and they kind of explained, some of them, how you might perfect these virtues. And so I want to focus on the mythology today and only touch a little bit on the virtues part. But, you know, these are things, again, that you want to look at how do I live these ideas and not think of them as some abstract thing that special people like Buddhas can do. But these are ways that you can practice in your own life. So dana, giving. There are a lot of different kinds of gifts. What you're doing right now is one of them. If you're speaking about spiritual teachings, if you're inviting others to hear spiritual teachings, if you're showing up at a meeting like this, and being attentive and supportive and all of those kinds of things, then that's what in Buddhism we call Dhamma dana, the gift of the Dharma. And then there are material gifts, so when the basket gets passed around here and you give to the spiritual community, that's dana. If you help out a relative, if you help out a friend, if you write out a check to your favorite charity, things like that, those are all dana. And then there are non-material gifts. Things like moral restraint. If you can be rude to someone and you don't, you give them the gift of your kindness as an alternative to give them the not so gift of your rudeness. If you give someone attention, you know, someone really, really needs someone to listen to them or something like that, and you give them that, that's dana. And when you meditate and you train your mind, then that's also something that you're giving to the world. You're giving the world someone who's more attentive, more able to live peacefully. So one of the stories that I like the best from the Jataka tales is about how the Buddha, the Bodhisattva at the time, developed dana to this really extreme, perfected degree. So he was a Brahmin. Brahmin is the caste in India that's closest to, that are the priests and so on. They're considered closest to the gods. And so he was a Brahmin living in a mountain, and he was striving to cultivate enlightenment by not committing any wrongdoings and by treating all beings with compassion. And so one day this Brahmin was out in the jungle looking for food, and he discovered a female tiger. And she had just given birth to several baby cubs. But she was exhausted, and she had no strength to hunt. And so she couldn't produce any milk to feed her cubs. So without any choice, out of her desperation, the tiger ate one of her babies in order to gain enough nutrients that she could produce milk to feed the rest of the cubs. Rita said she had a real tough time coming up with really happy songs to go along with these stories today. I promise they're not all like this. Anyway, the Brahmin saw this, and he was just heartbroken when he saw what had happened. And he thought to himself, there's just no end to the suffering of sentient beings. No words could describe how painful it must be for this tiger to have to do that in order to feed her cubs. And so he started looking around for food that he could feed this tiger with so that she wouldn't have to do this again. But he couldn't find anything. So finally he thought, well, the purpose for cultivating awakening is to eliminate the suffering of sentient beings and to turn their sufferings to happiness. I have an opportunity to do that right now. I'll get old and die eventually, so I'm going to sacrifice my body so that the mother and her cubs can all survive. And so, in making this decision, he moved down and gave himself to the mother tiger so that she could eat him and save her cubs. So this is an example of how Sakyamuni Buddha in past lives was willing to sacrifice himself to save others. And so because of this fearless and selfless charity that he did, he shortened the span that it took to attain Buddhahood by 9 kalpas. A kalpa is like a really, really, really long time. Perfected the practice of dana, paramita, and became a great spiritual teacher, assisting all sentient beings in the process of liberation. So he died then, but in order to help everyone. So the second of these perfections is sila, the moral and ethical restraint. So in Buddhism, when you become a Buddhist, when you go for refuge, there's kind of the 5 main precepts that we take. That we undertake the precept to refrain from destroying living creatures. and to refrain from taking what isn't freely given, to refrain from harmful sexual activity, to refrain from harmful speech, and to refrain from using intoxicants that make us forget the other four. So, you protect other people, and then you protect your mind so that you continue to protect other people. So, in a past life, the Buddha, the Bodhisattva, I should mention, Bodhisattva is Buddha to be, so it's the Buddha before he became the Buddha. In the past life, the Bodhisattva's parents owned a slaughterhouse, and they wished that their son would inherit the family business when he grew up, but he refused. He insisted on not killing anything at all, even an animal. So his father didn't like this, that he wanted to be a butcher like him, and so he gave him a knife, locked him and a sheep together in a shed, and said, I won't let you out until you kill the sheep. He said, I'm going to lock you in without food or water until you've done this. Well, the son thought, well, I could save myself if I decide to kill the sheep, but then I'll have to become a butcher. Should I commit such a crime in order to live and do such harm to myself and my karma in the process? And so he decided instead of killing the sheep, he would kill himself. So some time passed and the father didn't hear anything. So he went and opened the door to the shed. And he found the sheep safe and well and his son lying there dead. So because of his strong commitment to observe the no-killing precept and to save the lives of others, the Bodhisattva was able to be reborn in one of the heavens. Kshanti is the next one. So Kshanti is an interesting word. It's patience, but it's sort of patient endurance. It's related to the one that comes after it, which is sort of diligent endurance. It's interesting. I'm going to be ordaining again. I'm going to have dual ordination. So I'm ordaining as a Soto Zen monk. And as part of what I have to do is I have to hand sew the ceremonial robe, which ends up being a sheet like 9 feet by 5 feet or something. So I have to hand sew this with little bitty stitches. And it's very easy to want to get this over with in a hurry. And so it's a real practice in that sort of calm, patient diligence. The Buddha said this was very, very important. In the Dhammapada, he said it's the foremost austerity. He said patience is the unimpeded weapon of the good in the development of noble qualities, where it dispels anger, the opposite of such qualities, without residue. It's the adornment of those capable of vanquishing evil, the strength of recluses and Brahmins, the stream of water extinguishing the fire of anger, the basis of acquiring a good reputation, a mantra for quelling the poisonous speech of evil people, the supreme source of constancy in those established and retrained. It's an ocean on account of its depth, a shore bounding the great ocean of hatred, a panel closing off the door to the plain of misery, a staircase ascending to the worlds of the gods and Brahmins, and so on. So patience is important. So, once upon a time, in a mountain, there was a monkey who had great strength and wisdom, and a heart full of kindness. And one day, while the monkey was climbing a tree to pick some fruit, he saw a hunter who was trapped in a deep valley crying for help. The monkey, of course, was the Buddha in a past life. And the Bodhisattva said, I've made a vow to become a Buddha and assist all beings. So if I don't save him immediately, he may die of starvation. I better help him. So the monkey climbed down the cliff to reach the bottom of the valley, and he carried the hunter, climbed up through the bushes, and finally reached safe ground. And he directed the hunter how to get out of the mountain safely. And then he said to him, I hope that in the future that you'll change your career of killing animals. Well, the hunter was trying to catch his breath and recover, and he was pretty tired and everything, and he thought to himself, I'm weak, and I'm starving, and I might not make it out of this mountain, so I should just kill this monkey to feed myself. So he took a rock, and he hit the monkey on the head with it. This shocked the monkey. The monkey was bleeding, and he almost fainted, but he didn't die. He collapsed next to a tree, and he still managed to maintain a clear mind free of hatred. And instead of hatred, he felt pity and compassion toward this hunter. And he thought, I can't help him anymore. But hopefully one day he'll meet a Buddha and can learn to live a virtuous life. And let me make sure I never generate evil thoughts like he has in any of my future lives. So I mentioned patience is kind of one side of a practice, and diligent energy is the other side of the same practice. So virya, this sort of energetic diligence. Practice can be very hard. When we think about what these other things that I just talked about, these things that the Buddha's done, feeding himself to a tiger, saving someone and then forgiving them, and then they try to harm you in return, and so on. This can be very daunting. We don't have to do things like that in our day-to-day life, I'm sure. But even forgiving our neighbors when they support a politician that we don't like, or something like this, this can take a lot of effort. So, virya, sort of energetic diligence, is a method of keeping our practice alive even when going gets tough. So the Buddha was teaching in a village, and he told this story to a bunch of the villagers who had assembled. He said, once a bamboo forest was on fire, and the fire was spreading quickly because of the strong wind, and flames were swallowing up everything, and was about to wipe away all the lives in the forest. And there was a parrot who was disheartened to see all the living beings having no way to escape. So he flew to the sea nearby, and he got his wings wet, and he flew over this forest fire, flapping his wings, trying to distribute this water over the fire, trying to put out this whole forest fire with just the water that he could gather in his wings from the ocean. So Indra, one of the kings of the gods, saw this, and he called out to the parrot. He said, "Parrot, with this little bitty body of yours, are you going to be able to put out this vast forest fire?" The parrot said, "My intentions are even broader than the fire. If I'm not able to extinguish this fire in life, I vow to continue and put it out in my next life." Indra was very moved by this. And so he sent a great rain over the forest and drenched the fire and put it all out. And all the beings in the forest were saved. And the Buddha said, that parrot was me in a past life. And all the birds and beasts in the jungle are none but you villagers gathered here listening to me today. It says, my former self rescued you from putting out a forest fire. In this life, I will extinguish the fires of anger, greed, and ignorance in order to save you from suffering and help you attain peace. So jhana is meditative absorption. So we worked with that a little bit. The meditation I did earlier was about becoming absorbed into the breath. I was thinking about jhana. Why, mindfulness is not one of the perfections. We hear about mindfulness all the time in Buddhism. So why not mindfulness? Why jhana? Jhana is an interesting word. Jhana's the Pali form, jhana Sanskrit. When that got to China, it became Chan. When Chan got to Japan, it became Zen. So really, jhana means having a very finely trained mind. It means meditative absorption, but you can't do that without really training your mind to go where you want it to go. So a long time ago, in a previous incarnation, the Buddha was a monk with a very, very long hair that he kept tied in a knot, so he was called the top knot monk. You've probably seen pictures of these guys with a big piece of hair on top of their head. And so one day he sat down to meditate, and he said that he wasn't going to get up or move for 3 days. He was going to meditate for 3 solid days. Well, while he was in meditation, a bird came along. The bird needed to lay some eggs, and was trying to build a nest, and there just wasn't enough stuff around to build a nest with. And so he sees this monk sitting there very still with this mound of soft, fluffy hair on top of his head. And he says, well, I'll just lay my eggs there. So she went down, nested in the monk's hair, laid her eggs. And so 3 days later, when the monk came out of meditation, he realized that there was a bird's nest on top of his head. So he realized that to move would disturb the bird, and she wouldn't come back and care for her young. So there was only one thing to do. He would just keep meditating. So he didn't move for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, a week, and eventually 3 months until the hatchlings and all of it had left its mother's care, were able to fly on their own. And so finally he got up from meditation and continued on his way. I can't even imagine what it would be like to be able to sit in meditative absorption to that extent. So the final perfection the Buddha reached in his lifetime, the lifetime that we're familiar with, sitting under the Bodhi tree in northern India. It's the perfection of wisdom. And I'm going to read you a little bit about Robert Aitken and what he says about it. He makes a very interesting, explains wisdom in a very interesting way. He says the perfection of wisdom in this sense is being able to live your life purposefully. He says, how do you find a way through the distractions of conventional society? I would suggest asking yourself, what is my purpose? Everything follows from your response to that question. So we encounter difficulties. We lose our concentration. We get frustrated in our practice. We end up in circumstances that really challenge us. We have temptations to do things that we don't want to do. And so on. He says, as long as you keep coming back to your purpose, you're living wisely. So the first two factors of the Eightfold Path are right view and right intention. And that really encapsulates what we mean by wisdom. We want to see reality as it is and act in a way that's aligned with that. So you could say that if we live on purpose, we act in accordance with what we want to accomplish, where we want to go. So it's no longer about the question, what do I want to get out of this? It's the answer to the question, what do I want to do with this life? So Prince Siddhartha had attained enlightenment after 49 days of meditation under the Bodhi tree. And he used the Buddha eye to observe the sentient beings' karmic behaviors and the realms of rebirth in order to better facilitate the proper ways to guide them to liberation. And he saw that heavenly beings lived in the celestial palaces and had everything that they needed without ever worrying about a shortage of anything. He saw that human beings suffered from aging, illness, and death. He saw hungry ghosts living in filthy places and with their narrow necks and their tiny beaks and their cavernous bellies, never able to get enough. And he saw hell beings struggling and animals with mental states dominated by just blind ignorance and craving. He saw that all sentient beings were trapped in the system of rebirth, drifting throughout these realms, unable to find an escape. And so he meditated, contemplating the cause for endless rebirth of all sentient beings. And he finally realized that thoughts were constantly changing and filled with three poisons: greed, anger, and ignorance. And he said the sentient being's behavior determines who they are. The root of suffering is due to strong delusion and attachment. In knowing the truth, we can eradicate afflictions and escape rebirth. And so under the request of the Brahma king, he decided to teach the Dharma to the world for 45 years, applying this wisdom so that we would have a direct path and we could reach eternal happiness free from darkness and suffering. So that's the final Jataka tale, is the history of Buddha. So I'm going to close with a benediction. And this also comes from Thich Nhat Hanh. It says, the Buddhist tradition has a beautiful gatha. The one who is bowed to and the one who bows, both are empty. How can we understand this? We know that a Buddha is made of non-Buddha elements, including ourselves. And you are made of non-you elements, including Buddha. This insight into our nature and the nature of emptiness of the Buddha is prajna. With this understanding, we can remove the boundary between the one who bows and the one who is bowed to. When you bow to the one that is the image of perfection, you see yourself reflected there, and you're able to recognize that ultimate perfection in yourself. There's no separation between you and the object of reverence. We surround all beings with the infinite light of wisdom and compassion. Particularly, we send forth loving thoughts to all who are grieving, all who are oppressed, all who are ill in body or mind. May the light of wisdom and love shine within us so that we transcend the illusion of boundaries between us. Thus may we realize the emptiness and the oneness of self and other. May we all ascend to the throne of liberation and attain the Buddha way together.